Welcome to the 414th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have an excellent show for you today. We're going to start off with talking about AI, Chat GPT, GPT-4, all the stuff, all the AIs.
All the G's, P's, and T's.
All of it. We're actually going to be talking about how this kind of ties into smart home and how we could use it in the industrial IoT. Expect acronyms, lots of acronyms. All right. We're also going to throw in a little robot information there because why not?
Yeah.
It is LoRaWAN week. The LoRa Alliance is hosting an event in Florida, and we're going to be talking about a Senate deal with Unibiz and explain why that matters and get a little update on the Senate deal with Helium. Woo. And then we're going to go over to my favorite topic, which is Google's continued mismanagement of Fitbit and a little bit on the wearables news. We've got a bunch of smaller news updates, such as Best Buy doing a deal to bring in-home healthcare to users, Amazon's new internet service, a really cool use for a very tiny chip, and some security news from Amazon and on the industrial side. Plus, Kevin has tried out Home Assistant again and has some great updates there. And we're also going to hear from Nick D'Angelo, who is from Eaton. He works on public affairs there, and we're talking about government programs in the U.S. to help modernize the grid. And some of these things are things consumers can take advantage of. So you'll enjoy that if you enjoy learning or thinking about how to make your smart home use energy better. We'll also hear from our sponsor, Influx Data. But first, a message from another one of our sponsors. This week's sponsor is Silicon Labs. Silicon Labs is a leader in secure, intelligent wireless technology, and it has launched its 2023 Tech Talks schedule. I actually encourage you to sign up. They're great. This year's Tech Talks are going to include dedicated technology series for Matter, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and LPWANs in order to help you build the development skills needed to deliver cutting-edge IoT products. You can join Silicon Labs experts and industry leaders for these one-hour virtual trainings created for developers by developers. Tune in, ask questions, and accelerate your device development today. You can register at scilabs.com. And if we're in the same session, say hi. All right, we're going to kick this show off with a correction and an update.
Oops, I did it again.
Yeah. If it's not you, it's me. It's all
No,
good.
it was me. It was me again.
50 lashes with a wet noodle. We'll deal with you later, Kevin. All right. Last week, I talked about my desire for new speakers and the fact that I was contemplating the new Sonos Era speakers, which I'll just let you know I did buy. I was going to say I pulled the plug on that, but no. What is the word I'm looking for?
You
Never mind.
Took the plunge. You flipped the switch.
Oh, yeah, I took the plunge on that. I didn't pull the plug. I took the plunge. So I purchased them. I did get a nifty little discount through Sonos's upgrade program. Now, some of y'all might recall this. The upgrade program is where you take your old Sonos gear and basically register it with Sonos as being no longer in use by you, and then they brick it, which means you can't sell it to someone else. We've talked about that on the show. But in exchange, I got 30% off these speakers, so I was pretty keen on that because this was one of the ones I hadn't sold. Anyway, moving right along to the correction. Last week, we said that Sonos didn't have Google Assistant integrated into its smart speakers.
Which is true.
It is true. But we said that it was because of the lawsuits that are happening between Sonos and Google.
I had alluded to that might being the problem. I didn't say it definitely was, but I'm not surprised because they're having the lawsuit. But Sonos did reach out, so thanks for listening, Sonos. And they had said, actually has really nothing to do with that. Google has changed their Google Assistant technical requirements and has, I believe they said, made it harder to build a device.
Yes, the direct quote is, "We're evaluating these requirements, but it's a heavy engineering lift and we'll continue to prioritize work that builds on our vision of voice assistants, all working concurrently."
Right. So apparently that's the reason. So my alluding was I should have pulled the plug on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that explains it. I mean, have you seen any new third-party Google speakers?
I'm seeing fewer and fewer over time. So yeah, I mean, it's possible. I can only think of a handful of companies that have made them, such as Sony, JBL, Lenovo, And most recently, it probably is Lenovo with their little smart clock, but they also make a Madame A version. Yeah, I haven't seen too many.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. I really love my Lenovo. I'll be honest. It's a great device. I still use it.
Yeah, still use it. That was the very first one, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was like 5 years ago.
It was a while ago. Yeah, I still use it all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So that's our correction. We regret the error, as they say. Okay. So speaking of, well, not Sonos, but Madam A and Google Assistant and Lady S, did we ever decide on what we're calling Apple's digital assistant?
No, because we don't mention its name too often, but yeah, we probably should say Madam S, I suppose.
I don't like Madam S. I like Lady S.
Lady S, that works for me.
It sounds so dramatic.
I guess it works. I use the Australian accent with Lady S.
Oh, then it's probably not good.
Crikey.
It's Lady S. All right. There's a story in the New York Times that basically says that all of these have, quote unquote, lost the AI race. And I found this really frustrating because basically it's using the hook of all of these smarter generative AI chats like ChatGPT and that ilk and saying these, compared to that, are terrible. And I kind of feel like this writer must be confusing these AIs with like an actual person because they're not. These aren't well-rounded individuals, right? Neither is ChatGPT or any other generative AI. They're getting there. It is a little disconcerting, but I don't actually want to have a long, involved conversation with my digital assistant. I want to tell it to do something and have it be done. Mm-hmm. And I think we're getting there, especially this week. This week, OpenAI introduced GPT-4, which is a lot more flexible. It also generates more than just words. It can generate images. It can generate code. It's really compelling. So check that out. It's really cool.
It's also, they've basically trained it with newer data because the ChatGPT-3 model, that had internet data that was available through the beginning of 2021. And in a matter of, I would say, weeks, using GPT-4, they've retrained it with newer information, which that's very impressive, but that's the whole point of these things. You build these things to read models, you train it with newer data, and they get an instant, matrix-like upgrade, like I know Kung Fu. That's really impressive. I agree with you on the whole digital assistant versus GPT tools, because GPT tools are much broader in scope. As you said, even GPT-3, you could use it to create code. People have used it to create music. People have used it to create art and so on. Do you want your digital assistant to do that? No, it's a use case for a AI.
Yeah, and we'll talk about where we think it will be useful, but for like commanding something to turn on or off the lights, they do well, or answering my questions about where is the capital of Moldova. Those are like, I do conversions all the time, setting timers. Now, are they the cash cows that we thought they would be back in the day?
Yeah.
I mean, Siri is 12 years old. Madam A is, 9 years old now. So I don't think, are they dumb as rocks? Sure. But are they still useful? Yes. Did they generate the revenue that these companies thought? Was it a new paradigm for interaction? Yes. The revenue? Not yet.
No. And to be honest, they actually add a benefit over the GPT services because they're not really trained on everything that's available on the internet. They literally just reach out to the internet to get the information. It's an interface for the internet.
There you go. It's an interface, not an assistant.
It's the invisible interface, which I said way back at GigaOM. Yeah, that's a while ago. Yeah.
All right. So I thought this essay was really interesting. And, maybe I'm just taking huge issue with the headline, which is what the headline is for, because it did make me read it. But it really gave me a lot of thought. Like, it allowed me to think about what I want from my digital assistant versus where I think generative AI can help. And let's talk about that. In the smart home, I do think adding some sort of generative AI and saying to Madam A, hey, I'd like to set up party mode for my living room lights, my kitchen lights, my dining room table lights. I'd like to have them play fun colors. Or I'd like to set up a movie night and I'd like my blinds to go down. I'd like my lights to dim to 10%. I'd like my television to turn to, the Roku and the speaker system turn on. And then the generative AI can take all that and then create the automation for me. So it's not like me sitting here trying to program something, which is not as much fun.
Which again, it's an interface.
Yes.
In that use case. And I think it suits it well. This article kind of makes it sound like these assistants are dumb. They're not dumb. They're just limited to the use case they were designed for.
Yeah. They're an interface to get to, perhaps, this.
Right.
But you don't always need, not every, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And right now, generative AI is everybody's favorite hammer, but it's a big lift. It's a big ask. Right now, it's expensive because you're going to make an API call. It's expensive on the compute side. You may not need that all the time. So now it's fun, but hold up. So there was also a report by IoT Analytics that talked about what are the big use cases for generative AI in the IoT? And just like I mentioned, code generation for IoT is a good one. And I think it's an especially good one because when you're dealing, we talked about it in the smart home, but when you're dealing with the industrial IoT or that sort of thing, there's a lot of really esoteric stuff you're working with. And if you can actually put a generative AI model on top of that to help dig into the esoteric stuff and surface what you need, I think that's a great example. Another one is robot control. So you could use it, again, this is basically like an overlay on top of complicated esoteric code, which is robotics code. They have this idea of social IoT devices, which is kind of like asking a generative AI via a voice prompt. So it's kind of what we actually talked about, or allowing a device to answer complex questions. Instead of just turn off the lights, it tunes into a generative AI to tell me a story. We actually, a couple weeks ago, Paula Schoutsen from Home Assistant did a demo of using, this was not ChatGPT, but using another generative AI model to tell a story using, it was a HomePod, but it's over Home Assistant. Anyway, the point is, it told a story to his kids. So those are some ideas. I think this is going to be really compelling here. It's not like I'm poo-pooing this idea.
No, it's just using the right tools for the right tasks is really the point in my mind.
Yeah. So here's a perfect example of talking to robots. Google has shown off its Palm E. It is a robot brain that takes commands. It's a ChatGPT style AI model. And they showed this off. It was researchers at Google and the Technical University of Berlin. They unveiled this Palm E. It's a multimodal visual language model. So it includes words and images. So it lets you talk to a robot that has a camera in it. So
right. So the robot could, for example, you could give it a task, and using Palm or Palm E from Google, the robot could kind of create its own steps to figure out how to complete the task, because it has information from the internet. It has information about maybe the environment. It can see and recognize objects. So you wouldn't have to say, walk 10 feet, turn left, open the drawer, get my fork, close the drawer, and come back to me. You could just say, hey, I forgot my fork. Can you get me one? In a theoretical world. And the robot would say, okay, I know where the forks are kept. I know how to get there. I know how to identify a fork, yada, yada. And it just does it. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And that's basically a much more advanced version of what we're talking about with telling Madam A to set an automation for you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's abstracting away all of the step-by-step bits, because you don't have to do it manually and explain it, so to speak. The system itself can figure it out.
Now, when we add layers of abstraction, we also add a whole bunch of complexity. One,
yes.
So the potential for glitches increases. Two, we add a layer of potential lock-in. So I do want to caution here that as you do these sorts of things, creating that abstraction, you could be limited to only using certain kinds of models. And actually, it kind of takes away abstraction, doesn't it? Sorry, it takes away the potential for lock-in because it's generative. It's pulling from everywhere.
That's true, but it also depends on who is providing the system and the models. Like I would go with an open AI version of something over, say, Google version of the same thing if I wanted to not be locked in.
Yeah, and I guess as we're seeing with Microsoft's implementation on Bing, they're forcing you to download the Edge browser. But you can so easily, once the models are out there, train a slightly different version of the model. So then it may, okay, lock in is something I'll have to think more about. But y'all can also share your thinking here because it is interesting. I'm like, let me think more on this. Okay, moving right along, away from generative AI and digital assistants and all that fun stuff, let's talk about LoRaWAN. Woo! There is an event here in LoRaWAN Live. The event is happening in Orlando right now. Also happening this week is Embedded World. So two big shows from the IoT perspective. But at the event, Senate, which has a LoRaWAN network that is run, it's mostly here in the US. They operate the network for customers and they can provide devices and that sort of thing. They did a deal with Unibiz. And we talked about Unibiz last week because Unibiz is the company that bought Sigfox and is creating what they call a unified LPWAN strategy. And if you're like, Stacy, why the acronyms? LPWANs are just low power wide area networks, just so you know. There's a bunch of options there. There's LoRa, there's Sigfox, there you could even say NB-IoT. That's a cellular option. Amazon's building their Sidewalk network. That is also a LPWAN. So Senate's deal with Unibiz basically helps Senate expand into all of the areas where there are Sigfox networks and other networks run by Unibiz. So now they have more of a global network to offer their customers. The other thing is Unibiz makes devices, and this will help Senate have access to device and engineering skills that, will help their customers, again, expand.
Yeah.
Get what they need. I talked to Bruce Chatterley, who is the CEO of Senate, earlier this week about this. And I'm going to have a story in the newsletter talking a lot about unified LPWANs. But one of the other things that I found really interesting is he mentioned to me the Helium deal is doing great for them. And I don't know if y'all remember, so the Helium network, there's been a lot of changes. There was a lot of kerfuffle, but apparently enough people, their total number of hotspots that they're a decentralized LoRaWAN network provider. They also now have a 5G network, and they have a cryptocurrency and some things. That was where a lot of the drama was. But people are still running their Helium hotspots. I am. And
me too.
While the number has decreased, Chatterley says that it's a great backup network for them. They have over 85,000 connected devices communicating over the Helium network. And one of the best things, so in addition to providing coverage where they don't have coverage, it's also a good canary in the coal mine for them for saying, hey, we're seeing a lot of devices come online on the Helium network in this area. And that gets Senate the opportunity to say we should put our own gateway device in tower here. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Well, that's good because Helium itself has not been a shining star of late. And I'm not saying that because, I bought the Helium hotspot for $450 and thought I'd earn more than I paid. I think I'm at $40 right now. But the bigger picture is Helium hasn't been making a lot of money on the data service.
Yes.
It needs something to, in a positive light here.
Well, LoRaWAN networks have to be inexpensive because,
sure,
I don't expect them to make a lot of money, but it doesn't cost them a lot of money to have this decentralized network. It's kind of similar to what Amazon's doing with Sidewalk. They're giving away connectivity free on Sidewalk because they've already built in the capability, and basically they're going to take sips of my broadband, so they don't have to provide the backhaul. I know you can have opinions on that and act on those opinions by opting out if you don't like it. But again, I think it's a larger value add.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting model. It's a decentralized approach to networking. And, I'm all for that. So it's not that I'm poo-pooing it either. It just hasn't gone as I think many people had hoped in the case of Helium so far.
Yeah, if you hoped you were going to make like mega bank Like, I didn't go into it hoping I made Megabank, but I did happen to make Megabank. And so I told people about it, and I feel bad about telling people about it because
I didn't plan to win the Powerball, but
not everyone got the opportunity. I thought
Correct.
I didn't realize I was special because I was so early.
Yeah.
I generally don't realize that I'm special.
There's a reason I still run it, even though I'm not making, I have not made the cost
the
back,
incentives
obviously.
are not there, yeah.
No, not at all. But I do support the idea of a decentralized network that the data costs are cheap. And I'm happy to do my part at this point. And I keep it running.
Let's talk about Fitbit, another frustrating
Your
place.
favorite.
Well, so Google's been making some changes to Fitbit, and they did an event this week where they said, hey, we're going to open up more of our health metrics dashboards to people who aren't paying for the premium subscription. And they said that if you have a Pixel Watch, if you have a Fitbit device, you'll be able to view some of the things like your historical trend data for your breathing rate, your heart rate variability, and all of this. Right now, if you're not a premium subscriber, you only get like 7 days, which I'm not a premium subscriber. I was for 6 months when I got my new one. And I was like, yeah, this doesn't offer me enough value. I don't really need this.
I think it goes for about $80 a year too. So
yeah, it's expensive. I mean, for what it is. I just was like,
to see your own data, no less.
Well, yes, but it's your data that's only accessible through that device and their algorithms. But it really, like, they also had like workout videos and stuff like that. And if I had used those, I think that would have been helpful. But I didn't.
Right.
The idea here is that it basically implies that people are not excited about paying that Fitbit free. So they're pulling stuff out from behind the paywall. I wonder if they're going to put stuff like, are they going to launch new features there, or are they basically deprecating the Fitbit and they're just like, well, here's this stuff that people seem to like and we're going to focus elsewhere. So it's possible.
Or instead of an $80 annual fee, they scale back on the features that are there and scaled on the price as well. Make it worth somebody to spend $40 or $50 a year with, add-on features, because it would be really nice to have some recurring revenue there, right? Because Google bought this company and yes, they're integrating all this with Wear OS, but
in fact, I'm still like, ugh, gross.
I know you're not thrilled, and I can totally understand why. You need to give people a better reason, I think, to pay $50 or the current $80 a month. And you also need to give people a reason to buy Google Wear OS watches, which is part of the reason I think that they bought Fitbit to begin with.
Well, or you need to incorporate the hardware into the service subscription. So you need to pull a Whoop. And Whoop just is like, we'll give you this device, but you're going to pay us $30 a month. And you'll get all that data and the device. And that is the value. And I think that's an interest. Like, I'm wondering if we're seeing you can't buy hardware, like a freemium model for the software running on hardware, if you just have to go all in on the subscription, which is a really interesting question.
That would be a very non-Google thing to do, because you buy a Chromebook, for example, you don't pay monthly fees to have Chrome OS or get updates. I mean, yes, they have subscriptions for their services like Gmail, the add-on stuff that can be used on practically any device. Android too. I mean, yeah, they don't charge for that. There's no rent an Android phone and get all these great services. It's possible they do it. And maybe a good place to do it would be something on a smaller scale, such as Wear OS/Fitbit.
So good news, question mark, is that the latest wearable data from Canalys show that, oh my gosh, Google is number 2. Woohoo! Behind Apple in the worldwide wearable band market share data from Q4. So, yay!
The headline is good, but when you look at the details, it's not so good, because according to ours, who also looked at the Canalys report, the 8% market share, yes, was good enough to be second behind Apple's 27.5% of shipments. And Google was in 4th place a year ago. So that's good. But then when you look at the shipment data, Canalys says that Google shipped 880,000 Pixel watches in Q4, and the watch makes up 22% of Google's wearable shipments. So 78% of its second place showing is really from Fitbit devices.
Woo woo, which they're currently pissing everyone off on. So
Exactly.
yay. But it all may not be lost for Google and its Wear OS platform, because Polar's next watch might use Wear OS. So
Yeah, that's interesting. Having owned a couple of the Polar watches when I was running every day, I've also used the Garmin's, and those traditionally have used their own proprietary platforms and little app stores to add certain things, certain features. They were never as fully featured, say, as a smartwatch, but there is definitely an audience, a big audience that just wants the basics, and they want really good, health data from their workouts. So I'm a little surprised that Polar's doing this. I don't think it's going to make a huge impact to Google Wear shipments, though.
no, and maybe they're going to bring in some of the data that Google's been getting off of Fitbit, and, well, it's mostly Fitbit.
Well, yeah,
78% Fitbit users.
And they'll provide different metrics that you can look at that Polar currently doesn't provide.
Yeah,
But
they'll get like AFib. Maybe they'll get better. Like they can pull in some kind of quote unquote medical-y services that.
maybe. I think what will happen, and it's just a guess. I don't want to get another correction notice. As somebody who lived with one of these devices for several years during a long running stint, I think if they do this, I think they'll do exactly what Google is doing to the Fitbit users of today. The Polar users will be like, no, I like what I have. That's why I bought it over a Wear OS or an Apple Watch or whatever. And that's just not going to be a good situation. That's just a guess. Please direct all comments, questions to our legal team.
To Stacy. Thanks, Kevin.
Sure.
Yeah, I am the legal team. All right. So some quick news bits. We missed this last week, or I saw it and I just forgot about it and didn't put it in there. Sorry. But Best Buy its Geek Squad is going to be working with Atrium Health, which is a North Carolina-based healthcare system, to help build hospitals at home. And the Geek Squad's going to go in, set up all the technology to manage the heart rate, like all the medical management stuff. And
not in my house, they're not.
Well, hold on. And then that data gets securely shared with doctors and nurses through the telemedicine hub. So Best Buy's just setting up the virtual care systems. So they're not getting the data, but you're still not okay with this.
I am not. I mean, look, if somebody wants to do this, that is their choice. I would not if it was available to me as an option. I'm not with Atrium Health, obviously, because I'm not in North Carolina, which is where they're doing this right now. I think it's a 3-year deal. No, I mean, I like Best Buy when I want to go buy something. But when it comes to services, I've seen too many horror stories of the Geek Squad repairs, not wiping data off a refurbished machine that somebody else got. Also, the Geek Squad getting and sharing personal information and photos from computers they're fixing. And I know what you're saying, they're not going to get the data. But there's a trust issue that I have there that when it comes to my health care, I'm not going to allow Best Buy to deal with my devices.
They're going to be dealing with your devices. They're going to be coming into your home,
which they do today for many people. And
yes.
Again, if you're happy with that, that's fine. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying here's why I don't do it.
Got it. I don't know if I'd want any Best Buy person to have access to my Wi-Fi password, if we're being really honest.
Okay.
I'd have to put all my home health stuff onto, and that might be a use case where I would want to put it onto an alternative guest network anyway.
Right. Would you trust Amazon to have your home internet password?
Well,
funny you should ask.
Because Amazon is launching a home internet service using its Kuiper, Project Kuiper satellite service. And so
how do you feel about that?
Yeah. So I already use Eero routers, and I actually literally just the other day, I saw the option to connect my Eero routers to my Amazon account instead of having a separate Eero account.
Because Eero was purchased by Amazon, just to be clear.
Yes. And I did it. I connected them because I wanted to see, I wanted to test out how it would find the Thread devices using Eero's Thread radio. And
you fool.
I know. I felt like a fool, but I did it for y'all. And I felt really gross about it because, There is a lot of data coming off of my router. It's not just the devices that are in my home. It's like how well they're performing. It is Amazon understands what devices I have in different rooms. It understands what I'm searching for on the internet.
Whose device is where? And I would say that because we name our devices, our phones, our tablets with our names. Like mine is Kevin's iPhone. Barb's is Barb's iPhone. So I do that for a reason, for my own benefit. But now Amazon could know that.
By running certain software. So if you run like software from Origin Systems or Cognitive Systems, or it's Origin Wireless or Cognitive Systems, you're able to actually use Wi-Fi radio signals to detect like movement and people in a room. Amazon is not doing that right now, to be clear.
Yeah, who needs a drone to fly around your house to get that information?
Yeah. So there's a lot. So, I mean, on one hand, I'm like, well, shoot, if Amazon's going to provide me internet service, I guess they get this a lot easier, but it's still real disconcerting.
Yeah. And to be honest, even if you are interested, or if anybody is, I don't think they've announced the pricing plans or anything like that. People have extrapolated the expected cost to produce the 3 different receivers they're going to offer, which are going to vary in size and also vary in speeds, anywhere from 100 megabits to 400 megabits to a pro version, which is 1 gigabit per second over satellite.
But it's big. It's 11 inches by
11 inches by 30 inches. Yeah, the pro one. Yeah.
But it won't launch these satellites until 2024. But it did just a month ago get FCC approval for it. So it's happening unless they just decide suddenly not to. Okay, so let's talk about a eensy-beensy tiny chip from Silicon Labs. It's called the XG27 system on a chip. And it is, how small is it?
2.3 millimeters by 2.6 millimeters.
Yeah, it's tiny, but it's got a Cortex M33, so that's a decent microprocessor. And there's one that supports Bluetooth and one that supports Zigbee, and they've been basically put into a product from a company called LoRa Health. It is using it as a salivary diagnostic sensor. And you can put this sensor in, you can put it in a pill, you can glue it to someone's molar or a smart retainer, and you can monitor someone's saliva, which I guess is...
No, you can get a lot of information from saliva.
I guess you know how much sugar I'm eating. You also can check the pH of my mouth, which is important for cavities. I don't know. What else? Gross.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of other things that this could apply to now. I mean, glucose monitors, EKGs, all kinds of wearable things with a very small chip with connectivity here. So the spit sensor product, it's not even going to be out for 12 to 18 months. And that's if it passes FDA regulatory process. So I think it's more about look how small this chip is and what you could potentially do with a small connected sensor of this size from a health standpoint.
And what data it will get and who it will send it to.
Exactly.
All right. 2 hacks. You take the first one, I'll take the second one.
Did we mention Amazon today? Oh, yes, we did. Let's mention them again because apparently Amazon's Ring division, Amazon purchased Ring a few years back.
5 years ago.
Was it 5? Yeah. Before they purchased Eero, I believe. Apparently there's a ransomware group that has hacked Ring. They have said, basically they've tweeted something saying, we could always leak the data if you'd like. So I guess they're ponying up for some big payoff. Amazon's kind of been quiet on this. And I don't know if I'm not a Ring customer. So I don't know if Amazon has communicated to Ring people.
I am a Ring customer and I haven't gotten anything.
Really? Well, one statement from Ring to Motherboard was, we currently have no indications that Ring has experienced a ransomware event. But it did say, that was a direct quote, not quoted, but the company said it's aware of a third-party vendor that has experienced a ransomware event and that Ring is working with them.
So this could be a technical issue where the third party has access to Ring camera data, which is super common. We saw that with iRobot in that resulted in a big privacy scandal. We actually saw Ring have a third party in Estonia that was working with their stuff who had access, like unfettered access to camera data, and they just were storing it in
having a good old time with it.
Non-protected systems. So my hack is an industrial hack, and this one is not likely to happen. But it's cool. And it's cool because it's an analog hack. And I love sensor hacks. So basically, researchers at the School of Cybersecurity at Korea University in Seoul, they have nicknamed this attack Casper. And what they're doing is leaking data from air-gapped computers to a smartphone that's hanging out in someone's pocket. Now, in order for this to work, you have to actually install special malware onto the computer that is air-gapped. So someone has to physically then go in, put something on that computer. But if they do, then it's going to use the computer speaker to send data at a very slow rate. It's 20 bits per second at a very high pitch that people cannot hear. Maybe dogs can. I don't know. To a smartphone that has software on it that can receive those signals. So is this
It's not likely.
Super likely? No. Is this like a nation state attack? Sure.
It's cool.
It is cool. It's like something I would see on Mr. Robot. So, yay. Mm-hmm. Speaking of other cool things, Kevin, you recently got bored, or maybe I just prodded you enough and gave you homework enough that you took out Home Assistant, dusted off your old Pi, and tried it out again. What did you discover?
Yes. So I last looked at Home Assistant in 2020 as one of the many smart home platforms that we look at here in review. I'm not going to say we've reviewed them all over time, and some we've re-reviewed. So I would consider this a re-review. And it wasn't because I was bored. It's kind of because of what's been changing and how Home Assistant has been maturing, and I wanted to see where it's at. Additionally, I just wrote up 2 little mini rants about how everything is app-centric instead of why aren't we using the browser in a smart home, and Apple's HomeKit Matter experience has been subpar. So I'm like, those 2 things just added to the reason to do this, quite honestly, because you can use an app with Home Assistant, but you can also use a browser, which is how I'm currently using it. So this will probably be a little bit of an ongoing thing. Today, I just want to talk about the initial setup process, which is definitely easier. I mean, I know a lot of people shy away from downloading software and flashing an image onto a micro SD card, and I can understand that. But the process is easy, and it's actually easier now, quite honestly. I didn't even need to connect my Pi to a monitor. I did, not realizing I didn't need to. And I had the thing up and running in 25, 30 minutes at most. And 20 minutes of those were the system just booting up and starting itself up. So additionally, this time around, I noticed that Home Assistant found many more of my devices on its own. And I had these devices back then, so that's a positive sign. So again, looking at how it's improved. Interestingly, one of the things that it says it found is a thread network.
Woo! But it's not the Matter thread.
But it's not the thread network I use. It found the thread routers in my Eero routers and the thread radio in my HomePod Mini, which I currently do use with thread devices. Unfortunately...
Wait, with thread devices or with Matter devices?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they're both. So yes, like the Eves, for example, are Matter devices and use thread. It doesn't matter though, because at Home Assistant in its current state, when it comes to thread, you can add your own open thread router and manage that network. And these devices aren't using open thread. So I can't quite use thread yet, but we know that's coming.
Right.
I know you just chatted with Paulus, who is the founder or co-founder of Home Assistant. I don't think you guys touched upon thread.
We did talk about Matter. I know they have an upgrade coming later this year. I also should note that they are making a computer themselves, popping a Pi into something they're calling HomeKit Yellow with a bunch of different radios.
Home Assistant Yellow, yeah.
Home Assistant Yellow, sorry, and have all the radios in it, but it's hard to get. So following Kevin's, it's good news that Kevin's experience has been so much better and easier, because it's still pretty tough to get an easier implementation.
Well, it's hard to find a Raspberry Pi these days. So that's why I dusted off the one I used 3 years ago. And the Home Assistant folks are having the same problem because basically it's a Pi in their product. So, and if you want to pre-purchase the yellow and just not have to download software, it's going to remove that step. But honestly, it is just so darn easy. Anybody can do it. Believe me. My wife could do it. My wife could do it. And she's not she's technical, but she doesn't like to do these things. Anyway, one of the other interesting things, other than, I haven't set up all my devices yet. I've set up some. It's interesting to see what works, what doesn't out of the box. But more importantly, this time around, I was able to use the HomeKit controller integration, which pulls in HomeKit devices into Home Assistant. So my Lutron switches, I pull those in with the HomeKit controller, and they just magically appeared in Home Assistant, and I have total control over them. It's so lightning fast, it's ridiculous, for all my switches and the ceiling fan that I use with Lutron. I did not yet use something called their HomeKit integration, which is the reverse. And this is really interesting. It takes your Home Assistant devices that are not HomeKit and can put them in your Apple Home app with that integration, which basically is what HomeBridge sort of does.
Yeah. So you no longer need HomeBridge.
Well, you might not, unless you just want to not be using the Apple software or whatever, right? The Apple apps and so on. So far, very seamless, much more capable. It was already very capable. Love that it has a web browser for an interface, although yes, you can use an app. I'll be looking more about adding my non-HomeKit devices to HomeKit through this and many other things in the coming weeks.
Nice. All right. So we'll look forward to more insights from Kevin there. But now it is the section of the show where we take your questions and answer them. That's right. It's the IoT Podcast Hotline, which this week is sponsored by Very, an end-to-end IoT engineering and design firm. Partner with Very to work through complexity and deliver business value rapidly. You can learn more at verytechnology.com. Okay. Now, on the hotline, we are running a little low this week on questions, or month on questions. So give us a call at 512-623-7424, and hopefully we'll answer your question, and you will be entered to win a Hubitat. That is right. We are giving away a C7 Hubitat. Yay! Because we love y'all, and we like y'all to play with hubs.
And we want you to call.
And we want you to call. Can you tell we want you to call? We're so lonely. We're so lonely. All right. But we do have a voicemail this week from Sherry. It's all about routers, our favorite topic. Let's hear it.
Hello, Stacy. This is Sherry. I have a question for you. Is a mesh router really necessary for a small, one-level, 1,400 square foot home? Thanks so much.
Oh, Sherry.
That's a song.
Sarah.
That's a Journey song.
Sarah is the Journey song. Is there one about Sherry?
I believe it's Oh Sherry.
Oh, maybe it is. Oh, okay. Anyway.
Okay.
Sherry. Sorry, Sherry. Big digression there. So we have opinions. There is no right or wrong answer. You should have the Wi-Fi that works for your whole house and creates continuous coverage everywhere. For that, most of the normal routers and even mesh routers usually will cover up to 1,500 square feet. But, and here's the but, it really depends on a lot of things like, hey, what's your house made of? If it's made of stucco or plaster, that's not going to be great. If it's made of, normal, what is it called? Wood frame construction?
Wood framed and drywall?
Yeah, the signals are going to flow pretty easily. Is it a long line? Is it a square? Who knows? So if it's a square, sticking like one router in the middle and like wood frame drywall, you're probably fine.
Yeah, I know that a lot of these manufacturers, people who make routers, are always like, this router provides this much coverage, up to X amount of square footage. I don't go by that because of what you just said. Like, I have an end unit townhouse that has 3 floors plus a basement, and my internet provider, the router, comes in the basement. So I have to mesh it up from the front to the back of the house, plus from the top of the bottom. So we have one router on every floor to help with that. Maybe it's overkill. And quite honestly, if somebody says their router is going to cover 1,500 square feet, yes, it may. But remember, the further you get away from the router, you're going to have less of a signal and slower bandwidth and so on. So I mitigate that by blanketing the coverage to prevent that. So
yeah. And the other thing I would say is by doing two, I think two would be sufficient. You also get the benefit of creating a network that could extend further outdoors. So I don't know where you live, Sherry, but I live in a place where sometimes I want to go out and work on my computer outside because it's so nice. And I have the ability to do that because I've kind of overcompensated with my wireless network.
She has 9 routers.
I have 9. They're everywhere.
No.
And you're probably going to pay about $100 more for a decent Wi-Fi 6 router. I encourage you to get a Wi-Fi 6E router, whatever you do, because you're going to see, because it's going to future-proof you going forward. Because we're going to start seeing computers and maybe video streaming devices add that 6E capability, smartphones probably too, because that is short range, but relatively uncongested channels. So you're going to be able to get a lot more performance and capacity and lower latency from that whole new spectrum band that's been opened up.
In my mind, there's no disadvantage to going with a mesh router these days because you can. Sherry's basically saying, is a mesh router really necessary for one level 1,400 square foot home? So she's thinking, do I need multiple routers or can I get by with just one? The beauty of mesh is you can just buy one and not have a mesh. And if you decide you want to add a second one, the capability is there. The thing is, you'll probably pay more if you buy the 2 mesh routers individually as opposed to buying them in a bundle, because the first one might cost you $200, but the second one, if you buy it in a bundle, might only cost $100.
Yeah, so we're pro mesh here, but I don't think it's necessary unless your house has is like a long rectangle or made of plaster. Then you probably do want to mesh. Or if you have, TVs at each end of your house on the farthest wall, that would be another reason.
Or you want to watch video outside.
So,
which I do.
Yeah. I say go big.
Go mesh.
Go mesh in your home. All right. Well, that is our answer to your question. Thanks for calling in, Sherry. You can reach us with your own questions at 512-623-7424, and you will be entered to win a Habitat Hub. That concludes this segment of our show, but please stay tuned for our guest, Nick D'Angelo from Eaton. We're going to be talking about incentive programs thanks to new federal legislation to help modernize the electrical grid. So what you can do in your home, rebates you can apply for, when to expect it, all that. But first, a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Influx Data. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is InfluxDB, and I have Brian Mullen, the Chief Marketing Officer at InfluxDB, who is here to talk to us about InfluxDB and some of its customers, such as Disney+. Brian, what is InfluxDB?
InfluxDB is a platform for developers to handle time series data at scale. To give you an idea what time series data is, it's really just data that is stamped in time in some way. And that could be hours or minutes or seconds or even nanoseconds. Handling this type of data is pretty difficult and time consuming, and InfluxDB makes it simple and fast. And so developers can ingest, store, and analyze all types of time series data. And that covers metrics, events, and traces. And they can do it all on a platform that is designed to handle the high speed and high volume data ingest and real-time analysis. And InfluxDB itself consists of our core database and storage engine, the API, and a surrounding ecosystem of tools and integrations to ingest, query, and analyze that time series data.
Sweet. So why does a purposely built time series platform matter to IoT folks?
Today, pretty much all IoT data is time series data. It's generated by sensors, systems, and applications that change over time and are, therefore time-stamped in some way. And so as companies build new IoT systems and applications, the developers themselves working on those just have to keep up with the data, which is growing exponentially. The sources of data in IoT are everywhere. I mean, it could be sensors on a wind turbine, solar panels on a roof, temperature gauges in smart agriculture fields, or even sensors and gauges in a connected car, like the ones we drive every day. And these sources are producing data, things like temperature and usage and battery life, location, speed, engine efficiency. Now multiply all of that by the time intervals, and that's a lot of data.
What are some of the challenges associated with this amount of data?
First is, pure volume. It's a massive workload of data, exponentially larger than is typical. And second, for a typical database, whether it's relational or document, laboring through so many of these reads and writes really impacts performance. The ingest is slow and the query is even slower. The long-term retention and access becomes really difficult. So if you have tons of very recent or hot data alongside a longer history of older, important, but slightly less relevant cold data, how do you manage both? These are the hard technical challenges that most incumbent DBs are just not able to handle. And so where other DBs and tools fade, InfluxDB really shines. Solving these time series challenges is why InfluxDB exists.
So can you tell me a little bit about how your customers are using InfluxDB?
Yes. So let's look at an example. Disney Plus is the fastest growing streaming service. With over 100 million subscribers, Disney tracks all kinds of user updates and behavior in their streaming apps for things like phones and tablets and TVs. And inside that service, they use InfluxDB to monitor their mobile and smart TV applications to track the user engagement.
All right. And where can our listeners go to find out more about InfluxDB?
The best thing to do is to try the product, and you can do that by going to our website at influxdata.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Nick D'Angelo, the Director of Public Affairs for Eaton's electrical sector in the Americas. Hello, Nick. How are you today?
Hi, Stacey. I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
I am really excited because, my gosh, we talk a lot about grid modernization, what's happening with us adding more renewables to the grid, adding a car or electric vehicles to the grid, all the cool things I can buy in my smart home to make my home use electricity better, plus all the things I can buy for my smart home that actually make me use more electricity. And it's really complicated. So we're going to be talking a lot about kind of some of the federal incentives, maybe a little bit on the state side. So a lot about how we're going to get this done from a regulatory and incentive perspective. All right. So to get started, you should probably tell people what Eaton is, because I'm not sure if they if they recognize the name, even though it may be on the side of their house or at a utility substation near them.
Yes, definitely, Stacey. Oftentimes I run into that where folks will recognize Eaton from a big blue sign on a highway, or perhaps maybe they're in the electrical aisle at Lowe's. But Eaton today is a global power management company. And what that means specifically is we are manufacturing products, providing services and technology in both the electrical and mechanical power spaces. From a product standpoint, that could be anything from a medium voltage distribution transformer for our utility customers, all the way down to electrical safety devices installed in your home today, like ground fault circuit interrupter technology.
All right. Well, let's just get us started with there are billions of dollars coming in allocated by a couple acts in the federal government. The big ones I'm thinking of are the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act from 2021, and then the Inflation Reduction Act from last year. And I don't know if there are others. I'm sure you'll mention a couple of them. But big picture, what is the federal government trying to do? What does grid modernization even mean for, break it down for us?
This is an incredibly exciting time to be involved in the policy and advocacy space, working directly as an interface with federal government, state governments, even down to the local level, given the programs that are rolling out now, between the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, where we think about that really as an infrastructure bill, but not just around those, traditional infrastructure uses that we think of, roads and bridges. There is a significant amount of money going out to those traditional infrastructure uses, but there's also generational opportunities around electrification. As you mentioned, grid modernization. What does that mean? That's everything from funding for transmission upgrades, but excitingly, more opportunities for resiliency around our power infrastructure and integrating renewable energy resources, energy storage, and microgrids as we look at those programs and exciting opportunities across the board, whether those are in more urban or rural areas to advance that infrastructure. As you mentioned, there's also new funding to develop a national network of EV charging stations along corridors and additional funding for community charging as well to deploy that for the first time. There's funding to modernize our airports, our water and wastewater facilities, our public transit facilities. So very broad reaching. And all of that, there's a focus on electrification, resiliency being included as priorities in each of those sectors and those spaces. Adding to that, and even more excitingly, is, as you mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act. So that package includes a substantial amount of new clean energy incentives, many of which are tax incentives, whether those are tax credits for investments in renewable resources, microgrid controllers, and energy storage, or the production of renewables, advanced manufacturing tax credits for manufacturing components that go into clean energy uses or grid modernization capacities. And also, really excitingly, because this is separate from some of what we see on the government or infrastructure side of things, are incentives in the form of both tax credits and rebate opportunities for homeowners and residents to take advantage of new opportunities to electrify their homes, modernize their homes, and fully leverage the energy savings related to new electrification and really take control of their power management at the residential level.
So let's start there. Let's talk about the residential changes and shifts that might be happening and the funding available for it. I think there are two things. There's funding available that you've talked about with the Inflation Reduction Act. And then there's also this, I'll say, a local push to eliminate things like gas or furnaces, basically gas and furnaces in cities around the country. And I'm a little sad because I bought my house in 2019 and I put in a heat pump. And if I had just waited, I feel like I could have gotten some money. So what should a consumer looking to make their home a little bit more resilient, a little bit smarter, a little bit more climate friendly, what programs can they take advantage of? And actually, what should they be thinking about doing? Should I take out my furnace and install a heat pump? I don't know. Give them a map.
Yes, and you sounds like you're ahead of the curve, Stacy, because today, you'll see a lot of prioritization around the installation of heat pumps under these programs. But as I think about it, if I was a homeowner today, there are a couple main opportunities funded by the Inflation Reduction Act. So there are tax credits that any homeowner will be able to take advantage of for making certain appliance upgrades. So think about, switching to a more efficient electric dryer, hot water heater. And then based on those improvements, there are also, eligible applications for power distribution upgrades that may be required. But also really excitingly, there's direct rebate programs as well that will be rolled out through the Department of Energy and then through each state's state energy offices. So the state energy offices will be able to create unique programs that are designed for the residents of that state. And those can be developed in a couple different ways, but the overreaching priorities of those are to make energy efficient home improvement upgrades. So there are two rebate programs being rolled out through the Department of Energy now, and again through state energy offices. So one that we're really excited about is the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Program. This program is specifically geared towards low and moderate income households and will position these households with point of sale rebates to make new electric modernization upgrades to their homes. And so that might be things that you think about all the time. As you mentioned, purchasing a heat pump and being able to receive a rebate for that point of sale when you buy it. But one of the things that we're also thinking about as a provider of electrical distribution infrastructure in homes are the fact that load centers and those electrical load centers serve as really the enabling technology for broader electrification of the home. And this program directly allows for load center and wiring upgrades as a rebate under the program. And so one of the things we're hoping to educate consumers about, work with contractors to educate and raise awareness of these programs, are when you invest in the load center upgrade, you're positioning yourself for those broader energy efficient and electrification advancements. And when we think about it, enabling folks who are making investments under this program to future proof by investing in, smart breaker technology to position them as EV ready or manage the loads of those new appliances that they're bringing online, to more actively take control of their power management, to maximize their energy savings, and again, future proof these rebate programs. You can also then stack a rebate program with a tax incentive for similar investments under the Inflation Reduction Act.
I can't wait for a rebate for my smart breaker box. I can't wait for my smart breaker box. Realistically, how long do you think it will take us, given these programs, given what is even available today? Like I'm trying to think about, like, heat pumps have gotten significantly better. There's still a lot of misinformation out there about them. I'm also thinking about technologies like smart breaker boxes, which are relatively new. How long do you think this will be until it's like in a quarter of homes? Is this a fast moving kind of thing, or is this something we anticipate taking? I don't know. It took a long time to electrify America and acts of law. So
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think there's two pieces to that. And it's one of the reasons why we're really excited about partnerships like Brian Brickhouse, the CEO of our Electrical Sector Americas business, joining Rewiring America's CEOs for electrification. A piece of this will be on the education, marketing, and awareness side, right? Letting folks know that these programs are available, that there's opportunities to take advantage of them. And then also what new technology, what smart technology they'll have the opportunity to install in their homes with the support of these programs. And so that's why, I think that we need to think beyond even just consumer education and also think about how we're working with contractors and distributors to elevate the awareness of these programs, provide resources of those folks implementing the programs. Because as I mentioned, when you look at a point of sale rebate, many of us might go to a big box retailer today to buy a new energy efficient dryer or hot water heater, and we could take advantage of a point of sale rebate when checking out of the store. However, when you think about fully maximizing the benefits of the program and needing to install new upgraded power distribution infrastructure in your home, that's not often something you and I are going to do ourselves. And we're relying on trusted contractors to do that work. And, we at Eaton are working with our Eaton certified contractor network. That's over 1,000 contractors across the country, to raise awareness of these opportunities and provide resources, and working with others in industry like Rewiring America to help identify some of those resources and information. The other piece about the timing of the rollout really comes down to government implementation, right? So these programs, as enacted, last for 10 years between the high efficiency electric home rebate program that I mentioned, and then the homes rebate program, which is a separate measured savings program. That's around $9 billion over that time. We're seeing the Department of Energy now in the initial stages of implementation. There's, in fact, an RFI from DOE that's comments are due later this week. We expect then states, through their state energy offices, to begin to submit applications as we get further into the year, with the hope that these programs will begin to roll out by the end of the year. But again, we're going to see differences by state. And as much as it would be great to see, a standard program that crossed all states, each state's different, and each state will have the opportunity to build nuances that are effective for the residents of that state. So I think we're going to see a mix of both, the government's opportunity to implement this program in two layers, both federal and at the state. And then, it's impended upon all of us to continue to engage with consumers, contractors, and our networks to elevate the awareness and make sure folks have the resources they need to take advantage of these programs.
Because you are in public affairs, and because this is apparently everything is politics nowadays, I'm very curious because you mentioned the states getting involved here and having to develop some of these programs. Is there a danger of this becoming electrification and modernizing the grid becoming politicized and halting some of the progress that could be made here?
That's a question that I've heard raised before, but I can answer it this way. We work with policymakers, regulators, state energy officials across so many of the states, and we've had the opportunity to participate with many of these officials who've come together through trade associations and other networks to learn about these programs, to take advantage of these programs. And what I'm seeing is broadly folks, regardless of where they are really excited about these opportunities. I think there are definitely concerns that, state energy offices have varying degrees of bandwidth, and this is a new program that they'll be implementing and need to create. And so identifying those resources will be important. But on the whole, I see a super high level of excitement about the programs, and we're really excited to help those states be successful in their implementation of them.
All right. I will stop worrying about the governor of Wyoming then. Actually, speaking of the governor of Wyoming and electrification, let's talk about EV charging networks because the US is getting on board with EV electric vehicles, and I'm super excited about that. I do worry that because more people are driving EVs, charging networks are becoming, I won't say they're harder to find and sometimes they don't work. I drive a Tesla and sometimes it's gone from me not waiting anywhere to occasionally me having to sit for a while and wait for a charging spot to open up. And there is a ton of funding for EV charging nationwide. I'd love to hear your take on what we can expect because of that funding and how long that might take.
Yep, and we're seeing a huge increase in activity on this front, Stacy, and that's in a couple different pieces. As you mentioned, we're seeing record amounts of funding going into EV charging, and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There's $5 billion over the next 5 years for states to deploy a national network of DC fast chargers along corridors. There's also, and we expect more announcements out of these programs in the near future, another $2.5 billion for competitive charging grants that will go out for more corridor charging and also community charging applications. So we're seeing a lot of activity in those programs now. The states applied for funding and submitted their plans last year. And now we're going to start to see more of that roll out as we get into this year and beyond over the next several years. Additionally, in the Inflation Reduction Act, as I mentioned, there are tax credits for EV chargers and alternative fuel refueling stations. So there are a lot of incentives going out to these programs and these applications. But as you mentioned with your concern, one of the things that we need to think about and we're talking to policymakers about to deploy this successfully. It will also require coordination with those efforts to ramp up grid modernization, to think about our power distribution infrastructure at the utility level, given that when you put a whole lot more chargers out there, it requires a significant increase in power infrastructure in many cases. So are there opportunities for us to support new investments in charging infrastructure by integrating energy storage? We think so. We also think opportunities around microgrids can help further increase opportunities to leverage these programs, especially as you get out into more rural or remote areas where when you're on that long road trip in your EV, today you may have more concern about the charging infrastructure that exists for your trip.
All right. And we've talked a lot about what has been done, the incentives that are available. Where do you think we still need to work?
Sure. I think that right now we really need to think about how state and local governments are thinking creatively about a lot of this funding. For the first time, so much of this funding is flowing out directly through states, whether those are energy offices or utility commissions, but even down to the local level and local governments that are eligible to apply for or deploy these resources. And I think that it's making sure all of us are working together to help these stakeholders understand the opportunities, understand how we can overcome hurdles, and really position them for success under the programs.
Got it. All right. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming on the show this week. We really appreciate it.
Stacy, thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I really appreciated the opportunity to connect with you.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Internet of Things cast. Please join us Thursday and don't forget to subscribe. And if you can't get enough IoT news, I would love for you to sign up at www.stot.com for our weekly IoT newsletter, where we explain all kinds of things that we don't even get to on the show. And please subscribe.